Alright, hello guys, I hope it's working. Let me just double check. Okay, so yeah, I'm just making sure it actually appears on YouTube, since I'm going to directly. Yes, we're on. Alright, hello guys. So today is still 22nd of January 2022. It has been a while since I made any videos about Ukraine. What I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna do something which is a good professional YouTuber should do, which is like say, look guys, if you like my videos, do subscribe and do share them. And the reason I'm doing this is because I am doing some videos on Ukraine. I was never supposed to be a professional YouTuber, but unfortunately, as it stands, I'm one of the few places I found that are talking about Ukraine. Maybe not the same stuff which goes like into your everyday newspaper, but that's the fact. It is like I found some channels, right? But yeah, basically, if you share the videos, if you subscribe, then at least hopefully these first 2 minutes gonna be shared and people gonna be able to check out other channels which I have found so far that speak in English. And I'm gonna talk about this in a bit more length in a second. So obviously this channel, Denis Davidov, is Ukrainian. I think he's recently kind of ended up being outside of Ukraine. He's a professional pilot, speaks English, and he's been doing videos about the situation in Ukraine in English from the very beginning. Now he's already have more than 500,000 subscribers, so congrats to the guy, to Denis, and I wish him all the best. And I think you should check out his channel. His videos are in English, and they're he puts a lot more work into them than someone like me, who's like, for whom the videos is not really something, it's like everyday kind of target. But yeah, very good channel to check out. I've found a new channel, although it has been around for a while, but these guys have got only like just over 300,000 subscribers. Yeah, close already to 400,000 subscribers. Right, but it's a UATV in English, so I think it's a Ukrainian TV channel, but they're making their videos in English. So again, like short news strips from different areas, but more of a real kind of like views from Ukraine, from the ground, rather than like something which is like by people I've been watching. I don't know if I've got them still. I'm gonna go check on the other side of YouTube. Let me just go here, and we're gonna go to YouTube. Yeah, started watching the other day these two guys talking. For example, these are supposed to be like some professional like teachers in military academies in US. Right, and the stuff they were saying, I literally stopped watching after like 18, like as you can see on the video, probably like 18 minutes 48 seconds. I just stopped. And yeah, like I made a commentary, like they were talking about how Putin goes to see his troops and like how he keeps track of this. I was like, look, my commentary here, like I'm gonna read it out. Putin has never been to see his troops since he's been in the office. Where did these two clowns come from? The destruction of Ukraine air defenses never really happened. I couldn't last past 2 minutes, first 20 minutes. These guys have no idea about the situation on the ground. What can they analyze? Another clear case of people going retarded instead of going retired. Yeah, it's like, so there's a lot of stuff like this of people who like talking about the situation. I mean, there's a lot of nice people who really do good about situation in Ukraine, but like I think they get their news from people. So for example, we have here go back down to here, like where's the videos? Okay, for example, there's a video of a British soldier who's been like in Ukraine. He actually fought on the side of Ukraine, and he's been telling the way it is. Let's look down up here somewhere. Yeah, this one. So
I'm here with
this
Joe
is a whole series by Lindy Beige, or I'm not sure how to properly pronounce him. Sorry, mate. That's this guy, right? And he's taking an interview from a British soldier who had been in the fighting on the side of Ukraine, and he tells it the way it is, right? So there's a lot of people doing good job who are not Ukrainians. There's lots of people who are doing bad job, but a lot of people who are doing quite a good job by kind of going to the ground sources and trying to get some information out, more or less. But unfortunately, I don't find many channels which are like Ukrainian channels speaking in English like these guys. So like I say, UATV English, check them out. They have a lot of news feeds and lots of news sources. A privateer station, again, this guy is actually translating, and he's running the translation, obviously, of people talking. And this is in English, so basically he takes videos by other people and he just basically reads them, like, you know, dubs them into English, so you can actually listen to the source. Mostly he kind of has this guy, which is like this guy here, which is like Alexei Arestovich, but he has some other people as well. Mostly just this guy. He's like a advisor to a president's office. He's not getting paid for this job, but he's had military education, his intelligence educations. He worked with many operations. He worked a lot with NATO offices, things like this. But unfortunately, we don't see him giving a lot of interviews in English. There are some out there, but not as much, to be honest. Like, right? There's a Hromadske channel, which is they do their videos in Ukrainian. So again, lots of good news, but they have good subtitles. So a lot of their programs are properly subtitled, and you can actually understand what they're writing. Because obviously, quite a few times when you go to auto-generated subtitles, they don't make sense. Like they get everything so bloody wrong. Right, so there's other channels, so like Covert Cabal. I don't, like I said before, I don't know what these guys are, but they do have some like more of a technology like base, so they don't talk about the actual events, they talk about technology, like, you know, things like this, supply lines, but not actual life in Ukraine. The TVP World, these guys is a Polish channel. Right, and again, they have more information from the ground, from Ukraine, literally down to the fact they're right on the border. I think there's plenty of journalists there who speak Ukrainian, who can go to Ukrainian sources and get the news from there. Like, and Funkus 530. Now, these guys are military guys. They're actually an American channel, but they kind of say, look, we're not professional YouTubers, but there's a lot of professional military there. And they're trying to get whatever the stuff they get from the internet, and they try to run programs where they analyze this kind of war footage. Lately it's mostly from Ukraine, but also from other places as well. So it's not just about Ukraine, but these guys obviously, you know, are kind of organized, getting the news feeds, but they don't speak the lingo, so, but they do get the video feeds and things like this. They have their own channel, and you can go on their channel, and some of the videos, some of the least nice videos, but close to what is happening in Ukraine and other places, you can find them, obviously, just to show people, where anybody who wants to tell us how great war is, like, well, go watch there. You won't be a bit like, where is. And Pride Team, I don't remember, I haven't watched many of their videos lately, but again, it seems like a lot of short videos. Yeah, So, but again, what we're gonna go next, like I said, what's something I was gonna talk about. So yeah, we've got like half a dozen channels. Only 4 of them are actually Ukrainian, or at least have very, very close connection, like they're actually directly from Ukraine. And this is something I wanted to talk about. This is why I say, look, please share my videos. I'm not hyper entertaining. I know that. Like, my channel was never supposed to be about entertainment. I usually, one of these days, I simply got kind of pissed off with having to talk to someone about a subject I already talked to someone about. It's like, and they tell you the same stuff, and you go like, look, you know what, I just want to make a video on the subject, and if people start talking like, you know how people do on the internet, instead of wasting like hour of my time trying to read and write replies and seeing how these guys have got better, don't have better things to do than spend like 3 hours writing some crap to you. You go like, look, I'd rather make a 1 hour video and just, whenever I'm having a discussion about something, I'm just gonna post them a video. If they have time to kill but to write me like 3 hours worth of replies, they can watch a video for an hour. You know, it's like, that was my approach. It was never, my channel was never supposed to be like any big news channel or anything like this. It was always supposed to be something like a diary, right? Something I can reuse later on, just post to people. Or if I find some interesting information, I can say, put it in there and say, hey, look, I found this and I think about this, which is like this. So me talking about situation in Ukraine, it's very hard for me. I'm not, like I said, a YouTuber type. I have had people tell me, oh yeah, but it's easy for you, you can just go on YouTube. It's like, no, it's not. Actually trying to make programs like this, where I'm talking about things which are like, you know, they're interesting in a way to me that as an analyst, they're interesting to me to know about them because I'm Ukrainian, but trying to translate them into something which people gonna listen to is very, very hard, and I'm not prepared for this. Also, not, as like I said, these videos was a good example of learning to talk as well. You talk to a camera when nobody's replying, so obviously then being able to talk to a person becomes a lot easier. Right, just give me a second. I'm just going to do something if there are people making, yes. Now, as like I said, these videos was a good example of, well, I'm just gonna look out, maybe if somebody does watch this video and does make a comment or something like this, I'll try to reply. I'm not guaranteeing this. Right, but ever since I started making videos about Ukraine, somebody was also like, a friend of mine was like, oh yeah, but you can make those videos, but look, your lights are not perfect, your camera is not great. I was like, yeah, I know, like, you know, I've been making those videos for a while for my own, no, not even for money and being a YouTuber, right? So I know I wasn't putting in the greatest lighting and things like this. I was like, you know, but I know these things need to be changed if I want to become a professional YouTuber, which is not something I'm looking forward to as well. But a problem I find is that Ukrainians are not really investing their time to make videos in English. Like if you go into Ukrainian like YouTube kind of area, like Ukrainian like subreddit, Ukrainian subnet, you know, Facebook, whatever, there's tons and tons of things which are being said and written by people. Many of them speak a very good English, like, you know, some of the people I know, they speak English professionally. They, like, you know, they're journalists who've been working abroad, and yet I find this problem with Ukrainians, which is like they make a lot of videos and they say, we're gonna persuade Russians, try persuade Russians not to attack Ukraine. Like, you know, we're gonna tell Russian people that, oh look, you know, your boys are dying on our, like, you know, in Ukraine, on our land, you know, it's like, and we're trying to let them know that, look, this is like not good for them, they've been lied to. And I myself made videos already saying, look, 70-80% of people in Russia, they support this war. They supported this war and they still support this war because it makes them feel this. They've been living in a shed and they don't really get access to much of the internet. And I had this conversation with a guy from Russia, and he said like, oh, they can easily go to the internet from the mobile phone, but anybody will tell you, look, you're not gonna spend hours and hours browsing and looking for information which is opposed to your worldview on your mobile phone, right? And people don't have access to the right equipment. They have access, they just can't afford it, which means they don't have access. So there's a lot of Russians who will support this war, and yes, there is like trouble brewing in Russia because of more people dying than what the TV says, and like sure the reality is catching up to them, but it's kind of very complex question, right? And Ukrainians go like, oh, we're gonna make YouTube videos in Russian to speak to the people who want to kill us, right? And it really makes me like not angry, but not even annoyed, but frustrated, because Ukrainians make a lot of videos to try and dissuade Russians and things like this, but they don't speak to people who are their allies. And look, somebody will tell me, hey brother, the President Zelensky just been to US Senate, or like, you know, he talked to the American president. Look, we talked to the big politicians. Guys, it's all great. It really all is great. If you're gonna talk to big politicians, I'm finally starting to find my voice. But if you're gonna talk to big politicians, if you are gonna like be like that is the job of the politicians. And many of the politicians, they took that part of supporting Ukraine because they understand the consequences of those actions. They understand that there was a point of time where they have guaranteed, they said to Ukraine, look, if anybody attacks you, we are going to help you. And they understand that if they don't help Ukraine now, the next war is going to be a nuclear war no matter what they do. Because more and more countries are going to start looking to get nuclear weapons, because more and more countries are going to be like listening to them and say, yeah, hey, great, but you said to Ukraine that like you're going to help them. And now what happened is they got invaded by people who guaranteed Ukrainians and Ukrainian independence, which was the Russian Federation, and you sat down, did nothing. So when you come to us telling us don't get nuclear weapons, it's all bullshit. So you got this, and even then the West was struggling to properly support Ukraine, and we're going to talk about this later. But on an everyday level, we just talking to a friend of mine. We made a video a couple of weeks ago. We were talking that there is a lot of people, there's a lot of like YouTube channels in English, like American, British, German, French, which have been, to be honest, paid off by Russians, and they run Russian propaganda. They are like repeating everything which is out of the Russian textbooks, and there is very little. And just like I say, it's very frustrating to me because obviously Ukrainians are happy to make lots of videos to talk to Russians, but very few Ukrainians do videos to talk to people who are their allies, right? You know, and English is an international language, and most of the people who will support Ukraine, most of them will speak English, or any of like mostly English. So at least if they did videos in English to show the situation on the ground, to show what's happening there, like, you know, to share the news, people would find it more easier to understand why they're helping Ukraine. So for example, yes, there is a very good job which is done by, again, Western journalists and things like this, but again, not many people watch like New York Times. So like, for example, this is a video which has been done by New York Times, and here they actually follow what happened in Bucha, And yes, on a political level, many people know what happened in Bucha, but on everyday level, most of the people, some of the people might have heard about the atrocities that Russians, like, killing of the civilians that been done by Russian soldiers, like, just because they wanted to, they have killed tons of civilians. But there's not much coming out of Ukraine about this particular situation in English. So, right, these journalists have done a very good job. Obviously, they use the sources on the ground as well, but it's not enough. You do need, I think the issues Ukrainians have now is there is a conversation with the politicians, like, so it's conversations over there somewhere. There is interactions, like, so obviously there is help from the West that goes to Ukraine, but there is no interaction person to person. And as much as Ukrainians are happy to say that we are Europeans, Ukrainians are also very not happy but willing to fight for their freedom. Everybody does whatever they can, whatever they're capable of doing. But I think the key phrase for me is that Ukrainians are not keen to talk for their freedom. Right? We've been raised in such a way that we've been taught, like, look, you're not supposed to express yourself. It's very hard for people. Or you're not supposed to step over the big brother. And the big brother was always the guys in the Moscow, right? And Ukrainians have this problem of stepping over this big brother. I personally have made a video once in Ukrainian where somebody was accusing Ukrainians about, like, oh, your Bandera was a Nazi and things like this. I was like, look guys, you have to fight it, because this is bullshit which has been propagated by Russian propaganda for the last God knows how many years. The historic facts are such that Bandera was fighting against Nazis and against Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union and the Russians hated him for that. Right? So they've been always happy to tell that he was a Nazi, despite the fact that the guy has spent most of the Second World War, he's been packed up in a Nazi camp. Right? And the organization that he created managed to fight both Nazis and Soviet Union. As a matter of fact, some of the most successful Soviet Union operations against Nazi Germany, like, in the behind enemy lines operations, were made possible by the fact that the organization which has been created by Bandera has provided them with supplies, with bases where they could rest, with places they could hide out when things went sideways. So a lot of that is not being talked about, and Ukrainians are failing to do that. We're failing to do that, and again and again and again. Like, it's sometimes easier to fight than to talk. I'm the example, but we need more people talking. We really need more people talking, more Ukrainians talking about Ukraine. I'm sorry for getting on with this, but yeah, it's kind of a subject which usually gets me, and I just thought I'll let it out. Okay, so there has not been much happening. Well, there has been a lot happening on the front, but there has not been a lot of movement on the front in the fighting. And again, this comes down to a few things. Number one, obviously, each attacking session needs the supplies to be done, needs setup to be done, and at the moment the key area is, to be honest, around here. This is something I talked about in videos before, so we're gonna go over this kind of military situation where in some of my videos I talked about was like this area, like Orikhiv, Melitopol, Berdyansk, and to Polohe, like this kind of area was very important. So this talk about going towards Melitopol or down towards Berdansk, so down this area, to cut down, because obviously the Russians are using these lines, these roads, these railways there as supply lines, because the Crimean bridge has been damaged, as we know from before. Russians are struggling to restore it. The trains still cannot run trains full power as they used to do from there across the bridge here. They still don't have full speed auto traffic, so across the bridge there, and they say it might not be repaired all the way until March, April 2023, maybe even longer. So this means that the key supply lines which are going across that kind of line, so across Mariupol, Primorsk, Berdansk, Primorsk, Melitopol, and down to Kakhovka, close to this area, and Enerhodar. Enerhodar is all over here, so being supplied, a lot of supplies are going through here. Some of the supplies I think might be going through the sea, so there's a couple of they're not super big ports, but there are still ports over there, and they can bring them into the ports around this area. And if Ukrainians can kind of come down and keep those roads under control, at least under artillery control, they can essentially cut off Russian supplies over there. Right, there's a lot of fighting thing happening in here. So around Avdiivka, Olgine, Piski, Vodne, and down here, down this area, there's a lot of attacking happening. Near Bakhmut, for example, there's a lot of battles happening because the Russians want to kind of try and get onto this motorway and try to kind of quickly run down that, so they can hopefully kind of push Ukrainians away to the borders of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. But they're not succeeding after this big loss in the north here, where they have lost huge territories in the space of a few days as well. Right, so what we've seen is that they brought in like tens of thousands of people, and essentially they just keep on throwing them up front to essentially keep the Ukrainian troops from leaving those areas as well. Right, because if Ukrainian troops can have a bit of a leeway, they can obviously concentrate and then repeat the things which happened up north near Kharkiv, and also which happened near Kherson, where the Russian troops just couldn't hold the territory and were forced to withdraw, as well as leaving behind lots and lots of military equipment, lots of tanks, lots of ammunitions were left behind because they just were like, hey, we're not going to be able to hold this. A lot of that happened obviously thanks to the Western support, even though it was limited, but Ukrainians have managed to use it in such a way that they would make very precise strikes, which basically made Russians kind of falter and run away. The biggest issue right now is obviously the missile strikes and what they call them, flying mopeds, which is like drones the Russians brought from Iran, and they're making lots of strikes every day against Ukrainian infrastructure, against civilian targets. So they're not aiming military installations, they don't aim at the soldiers, they're specifically aiming for civilian citizens, for peaceful people, because this way it's not, they say how we're trying to kind of freeze Ukrainians out and things like this, and it is considered to be a behavior of terrorists, but they're not doing it, in my personal opinion. I'm not guaranteeing this, but from what it looks, is they're spending, like, say hundreds of thousands of dollars, even a couple of millions of dollars each day to send those more rockets and the drones into Ukrainian territory. And this is done not just to destroy the Ukrainian civilian infrastructure and not just to hit civilian targets, but also the target is very similar to what we have seen at the start of this war, where what was happening is that they've been making strikes from different directions to keep the Ukrainian air defense systems spread out as wide as possible. Ukrainian air defense is working very, very well. They take out 70-80% every time of the missiles and drones that come in. The Russians also have their troops in Belarus as well, so they're basically saying that they're keeping a few tens of thousands of troops down here, and this means that Ukrainians are kind of forced to hold a lot of military units around this border with Belarus. Ooh, you can almost not see the border. Okay, this red line, you see this pink line on here? Right, this is actually a border with Belarus, but yeah, and Belarus, here's Russia, but they keep the troops there so that Ukrainians are forced to keep their troops. They keep enough, like it's it's tens of thousands, but obviously if they strike in one given direction, you have to have at least enough troops to hold them back, at least at the beginning, so that your troops can react. But them is holding like one group means that Ukrainians have to spread out a few groups, which means that they cannot have as much free troops to fight the Russians on the active front. And obviously Ukrainians are very kind of straight about not attacking, for example, Belarus, not going across the border into Russia. Ukrainians are saying, look, all we want is to have our ground, our land back, and the Russians can, fuck off back to Russia, go neck deep, and what was it in the Demolition Man? They can dig themselves neck deep in shit and think they're happy thoughts forever, right? It's like that's all that Ukrainians want, right? Russians go fucking home. But the Russian war, like we said, is to keep their people from paying attention to the shit they're in right now. But why they're so keen at making those strikes, and why they're so keen at losing those missiles? They understand they lose the missiles. They understand that Ukrainians obviously are more resilient to that kind of terror attacks. Obviously, yes, people died, but it's very sad. But as a nation, Ukrainians are very much more resilient to absence of light. There's a let's just look up Ukrainians reacting to electricity cuts. Right, this is news, but yeah, Ukrainians dance in the dark to battle power cuts, BBC News. So, yeah, Russian shelling again cuts power in Kherson, and many people go like, it's like, if it was somebody really civilized, people who live in Germany, is like, the thought of a power cut goes like, oh my god, shit, what we're gonna do, if our power cut goes like, there's videos you can watch where people kind of start running the nail salons out of their cars So they would put they'd run a car, they'd run an engine to charge a battery, and then they obviously have the lights on, and the nail practitioner is gonna do nails for women using the car light, the internal car light, or like they will have a little light going from the USB port, so you can have some like really nice powerful light going onto your nails, but it's actually only using like 1 like watt of energy in an hour, like but people doing all this. But the thing is like it's kind of like the Russians are failing at they're obviously succeeding at keeping the air defenses separated, but they're not succeeding at bringing down Ukrainians. And the thing is like many Ukrainians have lived through the 90s, and I lived in Kherson in the 90s. Let me just show it on the map where it is. Most people might have forgotten, but yeah, this is the city which is being shelled by Russians right as we speak. But I was born there. I was born there in Soviet Union. I grew up there in Ukraine. It's like, and I grew up there through the 1990s, where we had times where we had like water. We didn't have times when they switch off water. We had times when they would switch water back on for like 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. Then it became 3. Then things became better, and we had like 3.5 hours in the evening, or even 4 hours in the evening, and 2 hours in the morning. And same shit there was periods was the same shit was happening with electricity, where we would have electricity gone for half a night, even in the winter. And the area where I grew up in Kherson, and let's go check it out. So, yeah, this is the area where I grew up. This is the district of Tavrichsky. Okay, let's look at the maps. Alright, Tavria. Ooh, it's kind of weird on Google Maps. Yep, so I grew up down on this, like a lot of time I lived as a we're gonna go there. Yeah, three spikes, 3 штыка. I think it's this one. Yep, these are guys. Right, and you can't see them very well, but yeah, this is like a 3 spikes, very known area in my home city. And okay, where is it? Okay, this is the market, this is the church. Yep. Okay, beer store as Vasily Monach. Right, but it's in the building where I grew up. So this is a multi-storied building, and I used to live in it. Right. So yeah, so I grew up there, and we had electric cookers in there. So you have lights gone for half a day, and to cook stuff you have to have an electric stove. So like so many people kind of outside some central areas. There's been plenty of areas in Ukraine where people in the 90s grew up in those conditions. So this is why Russian rocket strikes against the electricity power stations, even though Ukrainians are always grateful to the electricians that restore lights, that restore power, restore water, restore heating. Like many Ukrainians say, we're very grateful to them. But it also means that many Ukrainians grew up in those places which were away from the central areas, and where you had the situation where your lights would be on just like 3-4 hours a day during the 90s. So this means like anybody over the age, I would say, of 30 will generally be quite comfortable remembering those times, okay? So this is where Russians are failing, but like I said, what they're trying to do is they're trying to spread out Ukrainian air defenses, and why they're doing this is because of this. Російські втрати Росії в Україні. Yeah. Right. We're not talking about just the human losses, which is already over 100,000 people, which is like they're essentially throwing people not properly trained against Ukrainian troops just to keep them under pressure so that the Ukrainians don't have the freedom and don't have the means, so the Ukrainians have to put in the supplies they get from the West. They have to use those supplies in defensive operations against the just line after line after wave of Russian, even if they're not trained, very well trained soldiers, even if they're riding like shit tanks, it's still tanks and there's still soldiers, they still have guns. And as the story of Bucha, you can, like I say, you can check it out on New York Times. I will put a link in the description of this video afterwards. And to the New York Times article, you can look what they've done, and it's like, and Ukrainian soldiers, they understand that if they don't keep Russians at bay, Bucha is gonna happen again. But why they, like I said, we're gonna go back. Sorry for jumping, but we're gonna go back to their missiles. Right? They shooting the missiles so that Ukrainians' air defenses cannot fight against their planes. And what we see here is the losses, the airplane losses. Let me just make it bigger. Right, those are airplanes. So the Russians have lost 283 airplanes during their actions in Ukraine. Some of the airplanes are obviously not battle planes. They're just planes that were carrying the troops, you know, to drop them somewhere, things like this. But there's also a lot of fighter planes, a lot of helicopters, like fighter helicopters, so the helicopters which would be able to shoot shit at people. Right, overall 283 planes, 287 helicopters, so over 500 pieces of flying machinery, right? And 1,600 like flying drones as well. And the Russians shoot the missiles because the planes obviously cannot get to the areas where missiles would generally hit. But if they can spread out Ukrainian air defense systems, then that means that their helicopters and their airplanes and their drones can fly within a reasonable margin of safety. And many people say, but you know, those missiles and the drones they send into Ukraine, they also cost money. Not as much as the airplanes. Okay, the problem they have is they cannot refurbish the airplanes, and they obviously cannot refurbish the pilots. Their pilots died, that's it, they're done. You know, it's like they've lost already lots of pilots at the start of this war, and they're going to continue losing more and more and more. And if the airplanes has been knocked down over the Russian territory or Russian controlled territory, it's okay for them, but many of their pilots have been lost because their helicopters, their airplanes have been knocked down over Ukrainian territory, and the pilots have been captured. So the pilots are not too keen on flying, and so they're trying to spread out Ukrainian air defense. This is why when US have said that, yeah, we're going to give Ukrainians, I think, Patriot missiles, which are like for air defense as well, Ukrainians were very happy to have that. Like, Ukrainians are very happy to have that because it means that they can cover certain areas more, but also means that there's more air defenses for the front line, which means that the planes are going down, right? Let's obviously we talked about people. The Russians have killed a lot of people in Ukraine, but let's look about. We already talked about Kherson, so Kherson сегодня. All the news from Kherson, and I actually remember this one. I remember somebody asking me about where they can find news. So somebody I know from Russia, and they were like telling me about the things they see on Russian news and say, well, where can I say? It's like, well, just go into Google and I type in Kherson today, yeah, and you will get the news. We're gonna temporarily just allow everything. It's like my safety. And you can use these news channels, and because they obviously understand Ukrainians, many of these channels have news in Russian as well. So you can come in and there's like, there you go, you can go and read about things that that you can get the news from the right there. So these people are not writing for Russians, they're writing for the issues in Ukraine, And so they talk about mobilization. So they found remains of another 6 people. So there's some news, right? Сальдо пішов. So they're talking about iPhone already. It's like, you can't beat those people. Like, why do we like that camera more than others? Like, there's shells exploding on the streets, but they're just going like, yeah, which camera should we use better? Right, but there's news about like what happens in Ukraine. But let's say we're talking about some people. There was talk about like hundreds of bodies which were being found, like remains which were found in the buildings. But the buildings were mined. They had so much explosives in them that they had to be blown up. So they could not really identify all the remains that were remained in the buildings of ex-police building and security service building. So it's like Ukrainian security service is very similar to in its action to an American FBI, really. So not hundreds, yeah. So today the occupants had taken out over 1,000 tons of wheat out of Kherson. So again, you see this like all sorts of different news coming up on different resources, right? But the problems Russians have now, like I say, obviously Ukrainians are very happy that na Khersonщине. So there's been an airfield somewhere which Ukrainian troops have managed to reach to from the already free territory of Kherson. There's some people who were caught that were voluntarily working for Russian camp, so like prison camp, where they were torturing people. Obviously people say, oh look, there's somebody, a volunteer from the Red Cross have died in Kherson, and she died from an explosive. The shell had exploded, and the shrapnel has hit her in the head, and she died from what I understand is on the spot. I have seen that news, so it's like, it's a lot of stuff, but you can get lots of these news if you're interested. I can look up the news and read them a bit more in more details. But at this point of time, we're going to go back to the airplanes. And the problem the Russians have, we're going to go back to the map, is that during the fighting, and actually I talked about something that Ukraine needs we're talking about that Ukraine also needs airplanes. But the Russians are shooting missiles because they don't produce enough planes. Right? Beforehand they could produce like about 5-10 planes a year. Right? And many of those planes were produced with Western electronics. So with any semiconductors, anything like this was brought in from the West. Whereas to produce the planes now, they don't have that equipment anymore. Okay, and this is why Russians are really kind of struggling and having to kind of do whatever they can to spread out Ukrainian air defense system so that the Russian planes don't get knocked down. And yes, I know there will be always some guy who will tell me, hey, but Russians have got this Su-57, wasn't it? Like, was it Su-57? Right, whatever. This plane is supposed to be like, what was it? It should be like invisible for the radar. And was it? Oh, you know what? Yes, it's been equivalent to Raptor F stealth technology. There you go. This is the one. I sometimes forget the words. But it's supposed to be like hyper stealth airplanes. They can do them as like, well, in reality they only built like 4 of those. And I think 2 are not flying. So there's like there are some older planes which they're using. But again, they make 29s in here, they use Su-27s, something 32s. Right, all of those planes, they are heavily reliant on the supply of Western electronics. They have been reliant on those since beginning of 2000s. Okay, those planes don't have the internal equipment built in Russia anymore. Okay, and the ones they had was very, very shit. So there's some electronics there. They're like dating back to 1965, you know, it's like very much like Russian tanks. And this means that they are very struggling to produce any more planes. And yes, and the point with this, for example, Su-57, it's not actually a stealth airplane, which is like the most laughable thing about it. Because they don't have the ability to build a properly stealth plane, they've only made it in such a way that it's only if it's flying and the radar is like in front of it, so it has some stealth technology. But if the radar happens to be not exactly in front of it, but slightly to the side, it will see the plane as it would any other normal fighter jet. So essentially this jet is not a stealth plane. It has some ideas about stealth technology, but it's not a fully stealth plane. Like, for example, Raptor is, I think it's a Chinese plane, which is actually a stealth plane now, and F-35, you know, and there's been always like this, like the 2 guys I talked about in the beginning of the videos, and there's a bunch of people like them. Oh my God, Russians got like Su-57s. Like, yeah, they kind of designed it. It's not fully functional, and there's only 4 of them in an entire fucking country, okay? That does not count as a force. Like, well, I remember the same guys like going and like Western people going like, oh my God, the Russians have made this, what's it, Checkmate plane? Yeah, this plane, like Su-75, which was supposed to be a Russian answer to F-35s, right? And a hysterical part about it, all they did is they wheeled out a wooden like mock-up of what the plane's gonna look when they actually build it in like next 20 years, and everybody went like, say, there's like plenty of like Western professionals were like, oh my God, like F-35 is gonna go out of business. Nobody's gonna buy anymore because everybody's gonna buy the Russian Su-75. It's like, guys, it's just a wooden mock-up. Okay, it's not a plane. It's not flying. It's just like, well, we think it's gonna look like this, right? I mean, I'm gonna turn the camera. No, I'm not gonna turn the camera because it's not pretty view side there. But I have a project of my own, which is my toy project, where I want to build a four-wheel bicycle, right? Actually, you know what? I'm gonna put it on here. We're gonna go here and we're gonna go downloads. By name and oh, where is it? Oh, there you go. Four-wheel bike. Right, so this is something like this, right? That's what is SU75 was. This is like me walking on this mock-up, and it's just like, imagine if I turned up with something like this on some, I don't know, somewhere in that bicycle something, or bicycle show, or I don't know, a car show, and I was like, look, I have this idea, right? It's like you can drive two people, blah blah blah, and this is what I've got, and I'm confident that Tesla is out of business now. That's it. I've solved the world's problems, right? I mean, people put me in a white room with soft fucking walls, and deservingly fucking so, right? But Russians come out, they put out essentially a wooden mock-up of the plane they might produce sometime in the next 20 years, and everybody goes apeshit. Like, again, me using that plane, claiming the Tesla's out of business, white room with soft walls. Russians wouldn't mock up on the plane that doesn't even have an engine yet, nothing there, it's just kind of just wishful fucking thinking. Everybody goes apeshit. We get millions of YouTube videos coming out how the Checkmate is gonna take out F-35. It's like, really? There's like over 1,000 F-35s and still coming. Checkmate does not even fucking exist. And this is the problems Russians have right now. It's like they cannot build enough planes, right? If Ukrainians take those out, right, that's it. The Russians are lost, right? But another problem they have right now, so there's a lot of times we hear that, oh, something blew up in the airfield, or something blew up in some factory, oh, something blew up there, and everybody says, oh, that's probably Ukrainian strikes or Ukrainian like secret operations to blow shit up in some places. It's like, well, Ukraine does not have the weapons to reach there. Okay, even with the most modern drones and stuff like this, you know, to get there, these drones have to be some fucking magic, because not only do they have to have a stealth technology, but they have to be invisible, because they have to fly like for 1,000 kilometers to hit something. Right? So you go like, how did this happen? And in reality was that with the mobilization, right? And as you Ukrainians call it, mobilizatsiya, which is like gravitization. So essentially putting Russian people in the graves. But with this, the Russians have brought in, they picked up the way it was done. They essentially took out a lot of key personnel from their positions, and their technology they have is very, very old. Like, you know, they have not been investing into updating technologies for a very, very long time. And we see a lot of these places which used to run because there is this one or two guys who know what they're doing, and they be able to come in and then they're just able to fix things up, to keep things from blowing up, right? Essentially this is not happening. So like they were taking away pilots from the planes. There's like pilots who are flying jumbo jets were being picked up, and like, oh, what? 'Cause, 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 Pilot. Sorry. Yeah, so for example, we see here the pilot has been taken off. So this is a jumbo jet pilot. He can fly other things, obviously, with some training, but he's been taken over and put into to go fight in the trenches of Ukraine. Obviously, not the wisest use of talent, but this has been obviously used in many other people from many other professions, have been literally picked up and just dropped into the military, despite the fact that they were the key personnel from many places. And this is why we see lots of things going boom in Russia, right? Quite often it's not the Ukrainians who do stuff. Quite often it's literally things just go boom, right? But also quite often it's like you go like, well, so this place is supposed to hold so many tons of petrol, which they now need to be sent to like Russian troops, and all of a sudden it goes boom. Why? Well, I think because the petrol is not there, it has not been there for the last God knows how many years. Because as much as the Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in Europe, compared to Russia, Ukraine is a paradise. In Russia, corruption goes from the top to the bottom, right? And if Ukraine at least trying to fight the corruption, right, and the corruption exists in every country in Europe, like nobody can say that they're just, that their country is all like rainbows and unicorns. But compared to Russia, pretty much Ukraine is full of rainbows and unicorns, right? And people were doing all lots of dodgy stuff, and now they're actually just covering their tracks. And it's easy to say like, oh, something came up, flew in, and just made boom in our factory, because the factory has not been there anymore for a very long time, or it has not been producing the things it was supposed to, right? But with talking about production, right? The problem we see also, the same problem we see in the West, right? The thing is, the British Prime Minister, Prime Minister talks production of military equipment. Yeah, equipment delays threatening. So this was 2020, right? And essentially what we've seen lately, I think, is Sunak was talking about where he wanted to give more help to Ukraine, but essentially UK is incapable of producing a lot of equipment, and most of Europe has the same problems. Like, this is the things we're getting from some of the Ukrainian commentators who work closely with Europeans as well. The Ukraine does need support, and yes, Ukraine is not probably the best country. Yes, Ukraine, I think, overly hoped on the international kind of means of resolving that situation with Russia, which has been going from 2014, right? And Ukraine was like, trying to get ready for the war, but maybe not as hard as they were supposed to. But like something we talked about is like, sometimes the country has to make a choice between building tanks and building roads. and you need the roads because right now these are the roads which are used to supply the equipment to Ukrainian troops overall. So it's not always an easy kind of answer, but what we see is that Europe is incapable of producing to ramp up the production of military equipment itself. So it's like even the old tanks, just to take old tanks which are fully mostly functional, they just need a bit of spit and polish, as they say in England, right? And they still cannot put them online. So for example, they were talking about supplying artillery units from Germany, speaking about maybe getting German tanks sent to Ukraine. Yeah, so they said they will send some older tanks to Ukraine. They send the air defense units, for example, the anti-air guns, anti-air machines from Germany, but they're like, oh, we don't have enough munitions, and the munitions are only produced in one place in Switzerland. And obviously because Switzerland says, look, we're not getting involved into any wars, they say, look, we're not going to supply no matter what. We're going to take Ukrainian refugees, okay, but we will not supply any of the weapons to Ukraine because of our status of being the country that is not getting involved in the military conflicts. And they have been like this for a very long time. They had this position even during the Second World War, even during the First World War. So it's people have to respect that. But now what happened was oh, we can't supply, we supply the air defense system to Ukraine, but we can't supply them with ammunitions because nobody makes them. And it's going to take time before we start making them. Right? Okay, getting... Right, but obviously there's a lot of things like this happening where Europe has been caught with their pants down by not being able, and US as well, not being able to produce, not being prepared for the type of war which is happening in Ukraine. Right? The production is just not there. And yes, over time obviously it will happen, and Ukraine, we see there's an increase in supplies to Ukraine. And yes, many people kind of go yeah, but it's not free help. It's it shouldn't be free. Yes, Ukraine should be expected to pay for this help. I'm Ukrainian. I was born in Ukraine. I'm kind of more European now. It's kind of weird for me. But Ukraine is not supposed to get things for free. They do talk about using the money which is being taken away from Russia to use to pay for this help. But what we're seeing is that Europe is actually incapable to fight that kind of war. As a matter of fact, in a way, Ukraine was more prepared to have this kind of war than Europe ever was. We can safely say that if Russians have attacked Europe over Ukraine, so if they went through Estonia, Lithuania, and into the Western Europe, so didn't even touch Poland, because Poles were yeah, we're maybe not as ready as Ukrainians are, but we still have a few hundred tanks and we're happy to fight. But if they went through the Northern Europe, there's nothing Europe could have done. They wouldn't have stopped Russians all the way to French border. Right? The French have supplied Ukraine with a dozen of artillery machines, the big artillery units, and then they said, well, we can't send you any more because we sent you half of our entire artillery kind of force altogether is already in Ukraine. It's wait a minute, it's a dozen of artillery units is your entire artillery force? If anybody invades your country, you don't have anything to fight with, right? You know, it's like, and this is what we've seen a lot, that the Europeans have been struggling not just to supplies but also to ramp up productions, because for a very long time something which has been told by in UK and in other European countries, and we've seen this playing out right now, where for a very long time a lot of production has been actually moved out of Europe to a cheaper production countries. So like whether it was China, whether it was India, like, you know, a lot of manufacturing has been moved out of Europe, and it's very, very limited, and the governments are not willing to also say, for example, to people who manufacture tractors, to say like, hey guys, you know, we need new tanks, or we need to fix up those tanks. Like, you know, they're not willing to act in a military manner, and that goes back for quite a while as well in Europe. So this means that it's, like I said, Europe is not prepared to defend itself. Okay, it's gonna, if something, like I say, if Russians attacked Europe, they had very high chances of going very deep into Europe and actually taking over huge areas, getting their hands onto huge like factories and things like this. They would not be able to hold it. They would be pushed back after a while, obviously, but they would be able to steal a lot of stuff. Same way Soviet Union has done it after the Second World War. Like lots of German factories, lots of Austrian factories, wherever Russians have been, they just simply pick them up and move them to Soviet Union. Right, so some of the equipment still used in Russia is the equipment that they nicked in 1945. There's another thing, so we kind of covered this, so let's talk about more economics and things like this. Actually, no, we're gonna go back to economics. Let me just pour myself a drink, so, because I've been talking for a very long time here. Ooh. Oh, just over an hour actually. So, but something to cover as well is, a lot of people say that, but the Russians will come back. They will come back stronger, like the same way they did against Nazis. Like as we mentioned about the war of 1940. The Second World War, right? They done it against the Second World War. The problem the Russians have is that right now is that in the Second World War, when they were fighting Nazis, they came back by not just by throwing tons and tons of people onto the Germans, like the losses were like 10-1 or something ridiculous like this for every operations Russians ran, which is exactly what's happening now. So for like every killed Ukrainian, 10 Russians die. But the thing they had during the Second World War, which they don't have now, is during the Second World War they have been supplied stuff by pretty much the rest of the world that was not involved in the war. So it was from US, it was from Canada, right? It was from Australia somewhere. There were supplies. Most of the supplies from US. But that stuff was brought into US from other countries as well, and there were ship convoys coming into Russia and supplying Russians with weapons, with airplanes, with tanks. Like, you know, the Russian fought on American tanks. Some of the most successful Russian air pilots, air fighters were flying on Americans and British planes, right? They were not flying Russian planes. They were flying Spitfires. They were flying, what's the American plane? I don't remember, but P-45, something like this. But Mustang, something. I think it was a Mustang, yeah. But it was one of the kind of most successful planes in the Russian war against Nazis was in Americans and British planes, yeah. not Russian planes. It's like they had entire like air platoons which were flying purely American planes. It wasn't just like one, two. It was like literally like dozens, hundreds. Right? They don't have any of that now. Right? They just have people. Essentially, what Russians happening to Russians is what was happening to them during the Russian-Japanese War, where the Russians were being assholes before the war with Japan, so they managed to piss everyone off around them. And then what happened is they acted like complete assholes towards Japanese. There's a very questionable idea of the way who started that fight. We're not going to go into history, but what Russians did is they basically, as they were going, they sent their fleet to fight from Europe to Asia, and they obviously had to go all around India. And because they were like, they didn't bother checking what they were seeing, when they saw some smoke in the sea, they basically shot everyone up. They just went, shoot, there's smokes in there, shoot in that general direction, which turned out to be French fishermen. And lots of people died, and everybody went like, look guys, you completely taking a piss. You already managed to piss everyone off, and now you just did this. Like so. And basically Russia completely lost the support of the entire world. And the small nation of Japan managed to kick Russian ass so bad that people were like, "Wow, how did this happen?" Right? And it was only through the fact that Russians again kept on throwing bodies upon bodies upon bodies that they have managed to sign any sort of peace treaty. Same thing's happening right now. The Russians managed to piss everyone off. They shoot at the civilians. They act like terrorists, and they do not have the support of the world. Right? To bounce back, they have to have the support of the world. And the same way as it was before the First World War, where many people were they were already talking about using airplanes. They were already talking about using machine guns. The rifles were changing to semi-automatic or multi-loaded. Right, at that time the rifles were changing from something you just load from the barrel and just stuff to this kind of rifles, bolt action rifles, even semi-automatic rifles. There's a Winchester rifle which you could do like this. So all those was happening in the West, in other armies. The new artillery units were coming in. The Russian generals were discussing whether they should just arm their soldiers with spears, because they did not have the manufacturing capacity, which is something they don't have right now. They could not produce enough proper guns, and to the point of that they could not even produce enough guns, let alone modern guns. So, and this is the same situation. The Russians do not have a way to supply themselves with half modern equipment. So we already talked about the fact they used the tanks T-65, T-53 is probably gonna go. Yes, it's still a tank. Yes, it can do a lot of damage against civilian population, very much like if you watch the video from Bucha, the one I mentioned. They show in there how their armored personnel carrier uses this. They have a 13mm bore gun cannon which they use to shoot up cars or to shoot at people. There's a lady there riding a bicycle and they shot her from a cannon, 13mm cannon. And it's all on video there. I'll put a link in the description. But that stuff is but they're talking about Putin bringing in weapons. They're already using artillery systems which literally date back to Second World War in some areas, but they don't have enough ammunition for those as well. So they bring them in, but the ammunition is quite old, they don't produce enough. They had to limit their ammunition usage in many areas now. So compared again, the news that are coming out from Ukraine is that the ammunitions where they used to shoot out like 10,000 shells a day, now they go down to 5. It's like where they used to shoot like in a battle they use so much firepower, now they have to halve it because the cannons are starting to break down. Everything tends to wear out. And yes, they'll bring in older equipment, they give soldiers older guns. We've already seen soldiers which don't have proper first aid kits. We've already seen soldiers wearing the uniform from this, which was produced just after Second World War or even during Second World War. They kind of unloading all that. Yes, they are putting a bit more time into training, so they've mobilized over 200,000 people, and yes, they put like about 60 to 80,000 people already in the battlefront, but they do spend some time training the other people to do at least something. So, but they still put them in, and the situation is as such that they just go in there in Ukraine to die because they don't have the equipment. Yes, they do the damage, they can still shoot from an old rifle, but it's not as well trained, it's not as well equipped as the first military was, and Ukrainians just say that some areas, let's just take a look, some of the most fierce fighting was happened in Bakhmut. Right, if we look at the map, it was around here. I've mentioned it before, so this is the area where the most fierce fighting happening. There's some fighting happening all over here, but Bakhmut is like something people talk about a lot. Right, Bakhmut now, and yeah, there's the videos, but see the images, but we're gonna go to images here. Yeah, this is how it looks. Right, this is like, lots of explosives, lots of damage done, and it happens continuous fighting over there. People continue dying, and lots of Russians. There's people, the reports that come from there, they say that look, there's like areas where the Russian bodies are lying like level on the level because they keep on attacking, and obviously the Ukrainian troops have to continue fighting because if they let them through, they will already see what happens. And speaking about this area, this always find again returning to those people who should have retired, instead they've gone retarded. This is a picture of Ukrainian president actually going to Bakhmut, right on the battlefront, to talk to the military, talk to the soldiers. Whereas like Putin was never seen there. Putin was never seen anywhere near those areas. Like they claimed he'd gone somewhere like about 100, 200 kilometers away from the battle line, somewhere in the Russian territory, but they've never shown any pictures. Like, there's the difference between people, there's a difference in attitude, but obviously we see that the fighting is ongoing, it's fierce, and there's lots of damage. This used to be like a little forest. This is the fighting, and yeah, you can't see, but this is like level to the ground. You can't even make out if there's bodies there. If those are bodies, or those are just tree trunks lying there. That's the kind of fighting that happens there. So, guys digging up. Oh yeah, mine thrower. But as you can see, this is not Nice. And one thing we're going to talk about, I think this is the last thing I'm going to talk about today, and then I'm going to finish. And this is Ukrainian winter. Because again, a lot of commentators in the West, they talk about, oh, Ukrainian winter, it's going to be as cold as it's like in the north of Siberia. It's like, this is Ukrainian winter. And look, this Bakhmut is a bit further north, but the problem of Ukrainian winter is not the fact that it's hyper cold. No, it's like the areas where I grew up, Kherson for example, it's not even hyper rainy. Like, it's actually quite dry, but it's always very fucking humid. And further north, it's a bit colder, it's a bit more rains as well, so this is what we see near Bakhmut. But the Russian soldiers are not ready for that winter. What we'll see is that, again, a great loss of morale by Russian soldiers because they're in the territory. Most people don't want them there, right? They don't know what the fuck they're fighting for, and they don't have the equipment for Ukrainian war, for Ukrainian weather. And as a commentary by, actually, which was done by Alexei Arestovich, he's like talking about his experience on the battlefield, because he's an active also officer. He has been he's done active like service, and he was like, look, you sit there and you have the plastic bags, like cellophane bags around your feet so that they don't get wet in your boots, like some little tricks like this. You will not know them unless you lived in that area. So if we go to Kherson, right, Kherson is actually a plain land. Okay, let's go back to the map. Okay, maps. So, because the north is a bit colder, this area, it's very weird one as well. This one's Russians are not ready for that. I'll tell you a story. It was my uncle during the Soviet times. He used to live in far north, not far from Alaska. It was his job. He worked in the control tower for one of the military airfields, and it was like not far from Alaska. Literally, you could like at the cold weather, you could probably walk across the ice to get to Alaska. It's also, but he was like, and when he lived there, he used to come because most of our family was living like so my grandmother and grandfather on my father's side, and my uncle is my father's brother, right? So all my grandparents lived in this region. So like our entire family lived there, and he was working up north. He was like, look, I'm gonna stay there for so many years, and then I can have an early retirement, and I'm gonna move to south. But whenever they would come to Kherson for like about a week, 2 weeks in the winter, they would be like, hey guys, it's like +5, +10 here, hardly ever goes to -5. Like, this weather is brilliant. We live in the far north, it's like -20, -30. And we went to visit them there. It's truly -30. It's like you look down, it's like you look out of the window. It's like really blue sky, really beautiful. And you look at the weather and you go like, I am not going out. There's no way you're pulling me out of this building, right? Because it shows -35. It's like, yeah, I want to live, and it's Celsius, -35 Celsius, not Fahrenheit, right? But obviously, like when he was coming in to visit for like a week, they were like, yeah, it's not so bad. First winter they actually lived because they retired, they moved to Kherson. They moved quite early because just before Soviet Union completely fell apart, and they retired early. They moved, and it was like they're like, oh, like we've been here. It was so nice, And then the first winter came, and when they had to spend more than a week in that weather, they were like, oh my god, it's so freezing in here. How is it it's so freezing in here? Like, we come here from the north, and it's like in the north it was minus 35, but we're colder here than we were in the north. And this area in Kherson, it's a very, 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 very kind of interesting and very, very nasty when it comes to the weather. You have plainlands in here, right? So there's no hills, nothing. So the rains don't really stop a lot, right? So it's just wind, 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 wind. So you don't get a lot of rain, you don't get a lot of snow, but you have Dnieper River, Kakhovska. There's a water for the hydro station here, so there's a lot of water here. Right, you have Azov Sea water, and you have a Black Sea around here, and you have a Dnieper. So essentially you have a lot of like very, very humid wind going through this area. So it's like, even in the very hot days, like, it has to be very, very hot for it to be like actually dry. And then like 30 degrees plus 30 degrees Celsius, it feels like you are somewhere in the tropics, right? It's hot, and it's just like the wind blows. It's very hot wind because it does heat up on the ground, because the ground heats up and it heats up the air, but it's also quite humid. In the winter, it's even worse. Like, I remember I moved when I was already living in England. I went to Ukraine, and we went hunting with my uncles. And I was like, I know this shitty weather. So when we went out to the hunting there, my uncles were laughing at me because I wore a very long leather trench coat, like to keep the wind out. Under the trench coat, they were like, yeah, the trench coat is not going to help you. I was like, guys, this is just to keep the wind out. Under the trench coat, I was wearing like, two jumpers and one like jumper which had electric heating on. I had like good boots, and again I had socks which had like electric heating on. And my uncles were laughing at me, but then they went like, well, why do you not cold? I was like, look guys, everything I have has electric heating on. They're like, you got to be kidding us. And I was showing them like, look, these are the socks with electric heating. You can look them up. I was like, this is a jacket with electric heating. And when I was moving back, when I was going back to England, right, I had to leave all my electrically heated clothes in Ukraine for my uncles to use them when they go hunting. They're like, oh, can we have them? It's like, well, I brought so much. It's like, I brought some for my father, I brought some for my grandfather. Like, this is all we've got left. They're like, okay, cool, you're going back to England. Yes, you'll be fine. You're going to get some more. We don't get shit like this in here. Right? And they essentially kind of took all my electrically heated clothes to go there, because the weather there is kind of evil. It doesn't seem so cold, but it's a very humid wind that goes and it gets everywhere. So the Russian soldiers sitting in the trenches here, they are not ready for that shit. I promise you, like, no matter of this kind of hyper warm clothes, unless you have like something like skiing suits which are made to be worn and like getting wet from the falling on the snow and then becoming wet and then still holding the heat, which Russian soldiers don't have. Like, one of the requests was from the hunters who used to go hunting in the winter. They were like, hey, whenever you come in there, like, we know you sometimes get like cheap sales. If you find some skiing suits, like, can you bring us some? We'll give you the money. The money is not a question. It's just like, the stuff they were getting in Ukraine at the time. It was like, you looked at the prices and you were like, dude, I'm from England. We don't pay like that. In Ukraine they were charging double of what it was, literally, because they did not have those supplies at the time, so people could charge whatever they wanted. So, but that area, it's not the cold that gets you. It's the humidity. It's the wind, and the Russians are not ready for that. So what we will see is that, yeah, they're fighting, they're shelling the city. We have read like somebody about the Red Cross volunteer being killed by shelling, It's gonna continues happening. They're just on the edge, so like Ukrainian forces can't always, like sometimes they just can't catch them until the shelling started. So the city's always been under strike. It's always attempts to, say, pull the Ukrainian army, to pull Ukrainian air defenses like in different directions, so that they can fly their like airplane sorties and not lose as many planes as they already did. As I say, in 300 days, let's look back at the Russians' losses. Where is the? Nope. Oh, we took it out, but yeah, it was 200 and something, 287 planes in just over 300 days. Like a big plane, which cost millions of dollars, lost pretty much every day. Right, but soldiers like sitting here, they have like the, I don't know if the Google will show those trench lines at the moment. Will they or will they not? I don't think you can see them here, but I don't know how old this map is. Let's check a little. No, I don't think you can see those, but they have trenches in there. Let's look at another map. Deep State map, is it? Right, and can we go into, which one can we go into? Zasib's Russian, okay. Right, so that doesn't show very well. What is this one? Tveria, Pezhezhe. I'm not sure. I think there was one of the maps which allowed us to see in the different, like as in satellite images. Oh, there you go, satellite images. Let's see if we can recognize the Russian digging in. I'm not sure, but yeah, like if you can see, like you see, there's no mountains here. It's just a plain land, so the wind in there is getting to you. Right? What is this? This is like a road somewhere. Yeah, you see, there's like villages and the road going through the villages. Very hard to find where did the Russians dig in. I guess I was not prepared for this one. But as they're staying in the fields, number one, this is what they'll have, is that it will be cold, humid wind going through there. Another problem they will find, and this is what's, I think, in the end gonna come their downfall, is that although it's not always like wet, it's not always rainy, the land is there does get like a bit buggy, right? You know, into a bit muddy, and it's all like what they called like black land. So essentially, it's very good for growing stuff. But what happens was that is that this land, like they were like, they had the joke in that they have a joke in this area, right? You know, the better is your Jeep, the further away you have to go to catch it, to get a tractor, right? So they were saying it doesn't matter how good your Jeep is, no matter how good your 4x4 is, you are gonna get stuck. It's a guaranteed, like, you know, unless you go through like some very, very exact routes, right, you will get stuck in that land. You will get stuck in that mud. You will go somewhere and you think it's been safe yesterday. You're going to go drive over it and you're going to get stuck in that field. And then you're going to have to walk to the nearby village or, like, you know, wherever you can to get somebody to pick up to get a tractor to pull you up. It's just, that's just the way shit is, right? And I don't think Russians also prepared for this. They will start. They're already probably starting to get stuck. What you will have is that by the end of middle of January, end of January, they will be tired, cold. They will be undersupplied. They will be hungry. They will be running away from there. So if Ukrainians decide to attack, they will just either give up or run away because they don't have the supplies. They don't have the ammunition, they can't fight, and they're cold and miserable. Half of them probably gonna have a cold or something like this, so they'll be ill. Whatever, say, everything's gonna come crashing down on them. So this is how cruel Ukrainian winter can be if you've got no idea what you're doing. And I'm gonna use another historical kind of fact, because many Russians are complaining about how the Crimea used to be passed on to Ukraine during Soviet Union. The problem Soviet government had seen is that when they went to Crimea, right, Crimea is not that different from Kherson when it comes to the weather. Right? Unless you know exactly what you're doing, it's a very horrible place to live in. And it took Ukrainian, after Crimea had became part of Ukraine, it took a lot of money, work and effort, to turn Crimea into a more livable area. And even then, it's like, it's not really kind of hyper nice. At the time when Crimea was passed on to Ukraine, the population, because they kicked out all the Tatars, Crimean Tatars that lived in Crimea. But the population, I think the entire population of Crimea was like about 60,000 people plus the military base. That's it. People were not surviving in those villages. They didn't know how to live there. They didn't understand the climate. They didn't understand what to grow there. They didn't understand how to deal with certain things. And it was only after Crimea was given to Ukraine that it has become the true pearl of the Black Sea. Same as Odessa, they were like two main crowds in the North Sea, Black Sea coast, and because it was turned, Ukrainians have built the channel which supplied water to Crimea, and they started, because they had the knowledge of how to turn that land into the arable land and useful land. So the people who lived in the south of Ukraine, they were brought in, they were persuaded by money, by, hey guys, this is you're a communist, you're supposed to face on the challenges, and by simply people were like, I live in this village, it's a small village, look, you can, my parents have got like 3 kids, what do I do, where I go, and they were like, hey, we're building a new village somewhere in Crimea, you know how to live in this area, why don't you move to Crimea, you're gonna get like all these cool things to play with, right? And that's how they managed to kind of increase the population of Crimea. But again, Russian soldiers haven't got a clue how to live and fight there, and this is why we will see that there's a big chance that when Ukrainians will start their counteroffensive, like I say, hopefully Europe and the West overall are going to pull their fingers out of their asses and gonna start increasing the production, but they're being slow, but also we'll see, like something I talked about, the Ukraine is gonna get some sort of aviation. And yes, I know many Ukrainians want a very cool planes, but these cool planes come with great costs of flying them, and they come with the great long time to fix them, to prepare the pilots to fly them, and obviously to adjust the airfields to fly those. I've already talked about this piston engine airplane. They call them crop dusters, but those particular airplanes were actually made specifically for the engine, military. It was Embraer or something like this. I think they come from South America somewhere. Was it Argentina, I think, right? But those planes, they are capable of carrying the whole spectrum of NATO ammunitions, and which makes them very great planes to fly some very kind of basic missions to use the missiles that used against air defense systems and things like this. So I hope that is going to happen, and Ukrainians going to get those planes because they're easy to teach people to fly on, and they can resolve a lot of issues which Ukrainians have now, and because of the limited amount of the planes they have, they're basically falling head over heels to try and sort things which could be sorted by a lot cheaper, maybe not a perfect plane, but a plane which can do the job, like, you know. And considering that American special forces have been kind of quoted, I recently watched a video where they're talking about American special forces also using those kind of crop duster airplanes for their air support when they're doing certain operations, because again, those planes can fly low, you know, do their job and fly out, and they're much cheaper to fly than helicopters, for example. They're a bit faster, and they're a bit more maneuverable, they're a bit less noticeable than a helicopter. And so they can do a lot of stuff that helicopters do, but they can do lots of stuff that airplanes can do. So it's like a very good middle kind of level machine, which is good for many things. Like, you know, it's not perfect, but it does the job. Right? If that is going to happen, we will see that it's much easier to supply, obviously, Ukraine with ammunitions and weapons, because obviously now Ukraine can finally start moving on to a full NATO standard. They've been moving to that slowly, but with the leftover of the munitions they had from Soviet Union, obviously it was taking its time. And we'll see the Ukrainians actually attacking probably not in the next few days, who knows, but with also supply of the Patriot missiles, with the supply of the other new weapon system. Hopefully Ukrainians will be able to build up their attack force, and like we said before, probably hoping that they'll be able to strike in this area, because to stop high number of Russian supplies. Maybe they won't take Melitopol as the city, but so long as they stop the supplies, it's already a big win, because this means that the Russian troops end up in the same situation as they were in Kherson, where they had the troops, but they were running out of ammunitions, and the weapons they had were not working as well, because they were not serviced properly, they were not fixed properly, and the Russians had to leave a lot of stuff behind and run away. Not because they were not willing to fight. I mean, credit given to many Russian soldiers, they fight quite hard, you know, even despite the fact that they've been thrown into a battle while being unprepared, while jumping over the bodies of their fallen comrades. They still go forward and they still fight. It's like, you know, you can't say nothing about that, but again, there is a time when you have to say, look, you know, I have to get out. And hopefully that attack, that having access to the air defenses, new type of air machinery, a new type of equipment, a new type, because they said they will give long-range missiles, that will help Ukrainians to stop that kind of supply lines in this area. And also it will help Ukrainians to maybe stop more of those drone attacks, missile attacks, by again having some equipment which can deal with that from a slightly different angle. So if you have an airplane capable of knocking down the missile, carry a missile to air-to-air missile, or having the machine guns that can knock down this flying drone, again, this is an extra bonus for defending airspace, for bringing in for stopping civilian casualties and things like this. That's what I hope is going to happen. I hope that even more than that, I wish Russians would just pick their shit up and fuck off back home, and I know I said the Russia's gonna fall apart, but I hope it falls apart without touching Ukraine. Okay, I hope that tomorrow, I hope like give us a Christmas present, right? Yeah, blow up the Kremlin with Putin and all his fucking assistants, right? Hopefully they took off somebody who was like in charge of the, I don't know, some system in Kremlin which is gonna blow up and kill the Putin and all his assistants, and the Russians are gonna just fuck off home to sort their shit out at home, okay? And then there will be neck dipping shit and happy and thinking happy thoughts forever, just away from the civilian population, away from the normal people who want nothing to do with war. Okay, so that's my kind of take of everything for today. Thank you for watching if you lasted for that long. I know I'm a bit boring. If you did get to this point, again, I tried to cover as much as I could. I don't know when I'll do the next video. Maybe we'll start looking out some news from Ukraine and making videos, just reading news, so that people understand what's happening there from the point of view of Ukrainians, rather than from the point of view of the Western media. Even though they do a lot of work, they cover the Ukrainian conflict, obviously in great detail, but they are obviously not there. Like we have seen, there's lots of news just in the city I was born in. There's a lot of other areas in Ukraine where you will never see on the main pages. So I hope everything goes fine with you. I wish you all to have some peaceful skies over your head. I hope that this war and many other wars which were instigated for no good reasons can have come to an end, and next time we have an argument about, I have conversation with people about something, it's not going to be about what's the best way of, I don't know, killing someone, or what's the best military technology, about things that are, I don't know, closer to all of us, like, I don't know, what was everybody's best favorite meal or something like this. Okay, so all the best to you. Thanks for lasting with me for so long. I hope you all do well. Any comments you have, please put them on. I'll be happy. The more comments there are, the more I can answer. And I think the more interactive my videos become, like, so, rather than just covering lots of topics in one go. So thank you very much. Goodbye. Okay, your stream will stop.